You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
This episode looks at the European Union through the lens of European history and what that history says about the continent's future. The European Union stands as one of the most divisive topics in modern Europe. Europeans have spent decades arguing about what it is, what it should be, and what it means for the future of European nations. To understand the European Union, its roots must be traced through centuries of political struggle. Some see it as the latest chapter in Europe's long quest to build a unified civilization, an idea that goes all the way back to the Roman Empire. A perspective from China puts this into sharp relief. From a Chinese viewpoint, the collapse of Rome was the worst event to hit Europe. Unlike China's Qin and Han dynasties, which stitched their regions into a single civilization, Rome fell, and Europe splintered. After Rome, European rulers kept trying to revive that lost unity. But what rose instead were competing nations that pushed outward through imperialism. In chasing resources abroad, they accidentally created American civilization and exported their own internal rivalries and divisions to Africa and Asia. This same imperial reach eventually fell apart. Some see the European Union as the continent's modern answer, a shot at stitching Europe back together, this time not as an empire, but as a cooperative bloc. From the Chinese perspective, a successful European Union would balance out the global order. The hope is that Europe's lean towards social democracy and regulated markets could break from the raw capitalism of the United States, creating a multipolar world. While there is debate about how much that view holds up, it opens up a sharp point. The European Union is a post-imperial experiment. It tries to move beyond the constant clashes between nation-states by tying them together through rules, shared markets, and shared goals. The official European story paints the Union as Europe's lesson learned the hard way. After the carnage of the World Wars, countries decided to stop fighting and start sharing. This cooperation would make war between member states not just unlikely, but unthinkable. Yet not everyone buys this myth. Far-right critics dream of an imagined golden age of nationalism, an era supposedly marked by clear borders and peaceful coexistence. Reality check. That age never existed. The so-called golden era of the 1920s and 1930s was packed with conflicts. Borders were redrawn through countless small wars. The Soviet Union, newly formed from the Russian Empire's collapse, invaded neighbors like Georgia, Armenia, Ukraine, and the Baltics. At the same time, new nation-states like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary scrambled over resources and borders, fighting each other in the process. The truth is, nationalism in Europe never stayed neatly inside borders. Many nationalist movements wanted to expand influence beyond their own ethnic lines, seeing themselves as culturally superior to their neighbors. The only real idea of a nation-state that limited its influence came from Turkey's Ataturk in the late 1920s, a concept that shaped modern Turkish politics but was mostly ignored elsewhere. The European Union aims to avoid repeating this cycle. Its purpose is not to erase nations, but to tie them together in ways that prevent old rivalries from reigniting. Modern Europe's focus on rituals of reconciliation is a core part of that effort. For example, in 1984, French President François Mitterrand and German Chancellor Helmut Kohl stood hand in hand at Verdun, a World War I battlefield. They did so to send a clear message. Past bloodshed must never be repeated. These rituals are not just symbolic. They build the trust needed for economic cooperation to work at all. Critics sometimes scoff at these acts as soft politics or German guilt. But in practice, they lay the groundwork for stability. Countries across Eastern Europe embraced this spirit of reconciliation after the Soviet Union's collapse. However, it does not always succeed. Relations between Hungary and its neighbors remain tense, and hopes for a stable partnership with Russia were destroyed by repeated aggression. So the core promise of the European Union is this: cooperation can replace conflict, but only if that cooperation is built on a foundation of reconciliation. When that foundation of reconciliation cracks, the whole European project takes a hit. One clear example is Russia. In the early 2000s, European governments, especially Germany, bet on deep energy ties with Russia. Cheap gas, they hoped, would tie Russia's economy to Europe's and make conflict too costly to risk. That gamble collapsed when Russia rejected any genuine reconciliation, choosing confrontation instead. Without real reconciliation, economic links alone do not hold peace together. For Europe, this lesson hits hard. Trade and cooperation come second. Reconciliation must come first. Another angle to understanding the European Union is to see it as a survival strategy in a post-imperial age. Poland's early 20th century leader, Józef Pilsudski, offered an idea that still echoes in today's Europe. Pilsudski and his circle, the Prometheans, saw imperialism as doomed. They believed that smaller states should join forces to resist the big empires, especially Russia. Pilsudski wanted a bloc called the Intermarium, an alliance stretching from the Baltic to the Black and Adriatic Seas. The idea was clear. Independent nations cooperating would have more power than any single state alone. While that federation never fully materialized, the European Union today carries a piece of that vision. Cooperation between states acts as a shield against imperial power. Ironically, when the European Union formed, its founding members were mostly old empires themselves. Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, they all still held overseas colonies. Their empires were fading fast, but they needed a new way to stay afloat. Pooling resources and markets inside Europe offered a path forward as their global dominance slipped away. This reality undercuts some modern myths. Take Brexit. Much of the push to leave the European Union was sold as reclaiming a lost nation-state identity. But Britain never was just a nation-state. It was an empire. Joining the European Common Market helped Britain adjust to life after empire. Leaving forced Britain to face the fact that the empire is gone for good, and standing alone brings new costs. France, meanwhile, is the last European power clinging to parts of its old imperial playbook. Its influence in Africa props up its energy independence, especially for nuclear fuel. Roughly half of France's uranium comes from Canada, but the rest is mined in its African sphere of influence. Losing that grip would mean buying pricier fuel from Canada, Australia, or the United States, or cooperating with European partners like Ukraine. Ukraine holds the largest uranium deposits in Europe. But if France wants Ukrainian uranium, it may have to stop blocking Ukraine's European Union membership. That means opening French markets to cheap Ukrainian agricultural products, which would undercut French farmers. Holding on to imperial advantages means France can dodge hard compromises at the cost of slowing deeper European integration. This is the trade-off at the core of the European Union. Cooperation demands compromise. Every member gives up something for a bigger benefit. When countries cling to unfair advantages, it weakens trust and unity. For Europe to stick together, holdouts must loosen their grip. That means letting go of lingering imperial ambitions. If Europe wants to grow stronger together, the old empire mindset has to die off for good. Some see the European Union as just another empire in disguise, trying to build a new civilizational bloc to compete in a multipolar world. But there is another reading. The European Union's framework of national cooperation might be the path out of empire politics altogether. This vision calls for exporting that model beyond Europe's borders. Some Portuguese leaders argue that Europe should deepen ties with regional alliances like the Mercosur in South America, the African Union, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Working with these blocs could be Europe's alternative to falling under the economic shadow of the United States or China. At its core, the European Union tries to prove that nation-states do not have to fight or dominate to survive. They can share, reconcile, and protect each other from the pull of old imperial games. If that idea sticks, Europe could show the world what a truly post-imperial future looks like. Look closer at where this leaves Europe now. Cooperation is the promise, but enforcing that promise takes constant work. When any member undercuts it, by clinging to old power plays or ignoring reconciliation, it risks dragging everyone backward. Hungary's government is one example. By refusing to respect its neighbors' borders and fueling territorial disputes, Hungary chips away at the basic trust needed for the European Union to function. Meanwhile, France's situation shows what happens when imperial leftovers collide with modern realities. The more France leans on resources from its African sphere, the less willing it is to compromise within Europe. But the cost of that strategy is rising. African nations push back. New global players like China challenge France's influence. Sooner or later, France will face the choice: cling to old advantages or accept deeper European integration. The lesson repeats. The European Union only works when members keep the deal. Reconciliation first, economic gains second, sacrifice where needed. The same logic applies when the bloc expands. Any country wanting in must prove it can uphold this ritual of cooperation. That means tackling old grudges and border disputes before they become a threat to shared peace. The stakes are real. The European Union is not trying to erase national identities. It tries to bind them together in a way that stops the cycle of endless rivalry that fueled centuries of conflict. The idea is simple but hard to pull off. Trust replaces conquest, shared rules replace spheres of influence, and small states gain strength by sticking together. The vision also holds an unspoken threat to any big power clinging to old-school imperialism. Russia's behavior proves that a post-imperial bloc next door can become a threat if that bloc stands united. That is why Russia worked so hard to divide Europe's energy politics. Cheap gas was a wedge to keep countries dependent and divided. Once that leverage failed, the conflict returned. It is no coincidence that Europe's harshest test came when its trust in reconciliation was weakest. When the bond frays, so does the shield that holds back aggression. The reality is that the European Union's strength is fragile. The system runs on agreements that can break under pressure. It depends on rituals and reminders, handshakes at old battlefields, joint commemorations, flags draped on tombs. These acts might look small, but without them, the machinery of trust stalls. Some see all this and argue that Europe should not waste time preaching its model abroad. But pushing this approach outward might be the only way to protect it at home. If Europe wants to thrive in a world dominated by power blocs like the United States or China, then building more cooperative regions makes sense. A world with stronger ties between the European Union, Mercosur, the African Union, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations weakens the grip of any single empire-style power. So the European Union stands at a crossroads. Stick to old habits of backroom deals and power games, or double down on the idea that nations can share enough power to stay strong together. In the end, the European Union is not just a trade zone or a currency club. It is a bet that the same continent that once carved up the world through empires can learn to work as partners instead of masters. If that bet works, it could be Europe's biggest export yet, the proof that empire can give way to something better if enough people agree to share the cost.